Welcome to another Love Ignites Peace book club. Hello, everybody. It's so great to see you all here on Zoom.
Yay.
We've had a couple of personnel changes in our book club. Bella and Mara have had to bow out because of other responsibilities. And we are so excited to have Ashley Newland joining us. Hi, Ashley.
Hello. Happy
So
to be here.
on your profile, it says your setting is the soccer field. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm in the midst of pursuing professional soccer. Been playing 20 years and I'm 24. That is my place of peace, is the soccer field. So,
you know, Ashlyn was a longtime soccer player. And as you said that, I was thinking to myself, I actually think Ashlyn started playing soccer when she was in utero. Because I remember thinking, oh my God, this child is going to rip me apart.
I had good moves. I was
good
practicing.
moves. That's right. Real good moves.
Practicing really early.
You're an avid reader, Ashley, and you are probably one of the few people on here who really loves to read self-help books.
Yeah, my dad, both my parents actually have always, they joke and say I was born with a book in my hand, because when I was little, I would fall asleep holding my books instead of stuffed animals. And yeah, so they'd find me asleep in my crib with like a hardcover children's book instead of like a stuffed animal. But yeah, I love learning. So, I mean, there's just so much knowledge out there. And yeah, so any type of book, really.
I think that's super cool. You're going to be such a great addition to our book club. We'll have to try to keep up with you on all this reading that you do. So our last book that we read was the Red Book. And we had a little bit of a smaller group that time because we had people who were sick, but we're all back together tonight and it feels so awesome. Just to do a brief check-in, has anything happened in the last month? Like, what have you been doing to ignite your divine spark?
The simple one is I've been going on beach runs. I was in the sick crew last week. I had COVID, or not last week, last time. And so just the joy of getting outside, seeing sunsets. I've really been focusing on trying to be in the moment. And that was sparked even before book club, but reignited during our first book club. And also feeling just grateful to be back here with this group. I really felt so much joy after the first one. So I'm starting to feel it rise up again here.
Annabeth, what have you been doing to ignite your divine spark?
Some extra writing and reading, actually. Just trying to start the new year off with those habits that I like to keep close, that help me build that joy within me. So reading and writing.
Actually, Annabeth might be the most avid reader on the book club podcast. I mean, tell people how many books you read like a month. Or how many words you read a month. I mean, it's like some...
I mean, I can read between 30 and 50,000 words a day.
What?
Which,
I don't even know.
I don't know. I don't know how many pages our newest book was because I listened to it, which was cool.
Thank you.
So, but I guess I'm just trying to give an idea of how much that is. But it's like a short nonfiction book is about 50,000 words. So it just depends. Depends on the day.
And that's
so thus listening was helpful. Listening was great this time.
But you do that not just for pleasure, right? That's your work.
No, that's my work. I mean, that's how much I read for work. That's not reading for pleasure at all. So
do you read for pleasure?
I do. No, yeah. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do since the beginning of the year, is really fit that reading for pleasure in, considering how much other reading I do, because your brain does get maxed out at a certain point. So
Totally.
There's like a point that's like, no more words.
Yeah,
that makes sense for sure.
Teresa, what have you been doing to ignite your divine spark since the last time we've chatted?
My divine spark, what I like to do is, most people might not find this fun and joyful, but I've been going through segments of my home, maybe a closet or a dresser or different sections. And I love getting kind of rid of old, organizing, and it just is like a roadmap for tomorrow. All the little places in my home. My home rises up to greet me, and I want to honor it from the inside, when I open up a cabinet or a drawer closet. So I've been a little busy doing some things like that. Just, it makes me happy. Yeah. Makes me happy.
Darian,
like
what about you?
Mine has been really just kind of engaging what life has been throwing me through lately, and just kind of trying to wade through all of that, because I know the many things that I'm going through right now, there's going to be something better. I mean, there are a bazillion books written on this, that whatever it is I'm going through, and it can only get better from here. So really just kind of taking that and trying to harness it and say, all right, let's just get through this, and just, going down that path right now. And just knowing that there's something there.
I love that perspective with igniting your divine spark, even through the difficult, going through the hard things and getting to the other side of it in of itself is igniting your divine spark.
I mean, it has to, right?
Yeah.
I can't appreciate my spark unless I understand the other side of it. So.
Oh, I was going to just mention the whole book. I know we're going to get into this. But the whole book is about just little coincidences, and reading that really reminded me to keep my eye out for those coincidences. I think what Darian just said is one of those, because Ashlyn, you and I were just texting about this when I was teasing you about something you're going through. And I was like, you need to be asking the whys and the something mores. And it's just, I'm noticing all of the synchronicity. I was putting Love Ignites Peace right back to you, giving your own message to you. But anyways, that just made me think of that. And, little coincidence to start off the podcast.
No, I love it. No, she really was, but it was so funny. It was like such coincident, like divine timing. I've had a little bit of a hard time letting go of a guy that I was seeing, and that's what Jenna is referring to.
This guy's first name is Toxic.
No, you don't say his name. You can hear this.
I said his name was Toxic.
Anyways, I'm getting sweaty. I'm getting red. No, anyways, I had been asking myself, like, I know this isn't good for me. This is not the kind of guy I typically attract. Like, I've never had this scenario. So why, in the vein of Love Ignites Peace, like Jenna was saying, like, why am I having a hard time letting go of this situation? What in me am I needing to fill up, and blah, blah, blah. And so coincidentally, at the exact same time you're in the mountains, when I was starting to ask whys, because I know there's something more than this relationship, Jenna texted me that. And I was like, I am literally going through the whys this weekend. I'm literally asking the questions. And then I did some subconscious transformation work around it, and it was huge, and I felt a lot better. But all these little coincidences are really cool. And then also just, I love this little support of our group here. Just cheering each other on and help ignite the divine spark.
Other than letting go of things that aren't in your highest and best good, are there anything else that's been igniting your divine spark?
Well, on the last podcast, not the last book club, but the last podcast, I said that my word of the year is champagne, because my intention for this year is to create a life worth celebrating. And I think that in of itself, that life worth celebrating is igniting my divine spark in all things. So in my work, igniting that divine spark in my passion, in my romantic relationships, like trying to find that right guy, being like that divine connection, seeing more sunsets, like all those kinds of things, just igniting my divine spark through celebrating life and what fills me up. So yeah. What about you, Mom?
This is going to sound so boring, but work is really igniting my divine spark. Like, I just really love what we're doing. I love getting together for book club podcasts. I love putting together our other podcasts. I love writing, creating content for Love Ignites Peace. It's like really, really fulfilling to me.
Well, love that.
Well,
let's go. I guess we did Ashley go.
Oh, Ashley, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
What has been igniting your divine spark? I know you probably didn't read the red book.
no, I haven't. I'm going to hopefully at some point. But I guess for me, I recently just did a lot of changes to ignite the spark, and I moved again, and also quit my job to fully focus on soccer 100%. So a lot of little changes for a big change hopefully soon.
What does that mean?
that you made all these changes to focus on soccer. What is that goal? I'm just curious.
So I want to play professionally, and
Okay.
I haven't been able to put 110% of my time, energy, everything into it, with other things going on, like working, and then work gets the first priority, and then my little habits, like my sleep's all messed up. I'm not training properly, just like little things that would aid the full potential I could put into it. And so I just decided, well, if I want to pursue this, I need to put everything and more into it. And I can't do that if I have other priorities. So I cut them all off and I said, no, tunnel vision for this for the next few months.
That is definitely living your something mores and making a commitment to it, Ashley. That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So shall we get into the Celestine Prophecy?
Yes.
So just a quick summary of this book for all the listeners. In this fiction adventure, the main character goes on a thrilling journey to learn about 9 insights from an ancient manuscript found in Peru. Insights that hold the power to change a reader's life. Each key insight builds on the next. It becomes clear that the ancient wisdom is a roadmap for humanity's next evolutionary leap. The plot thickens as those in power feel their position of power threatened, and they begin to fight to keep the manuscript from going public. The Celestine Prophecy leaves you feeling like there is a deep truth to be uncovered, a truth that could change your life beyond the fictional story. Overall thoughts? Did you guys like it?
Oh, yes.
Did you not like it?
I loved it. And it's the second time I've read it. I think it was better the second time than the first time.
I got a Kindle for Christmas, so this is my first digital reading experience, and I have so much highlighted in here. There's a place where you can go through and look at the quotes, and for this book in particular, I find that when I'm annotating, it's a lot of times shorter quotes, and my quotes are like full paragraphs or half pages that I was highlighting, and there's just a lot of stuff that I think I'm going to come back to at a later date too, and reread some of these because there's some really powerful statements in here.
Mine ended up in Post-its because I think it's more questions and things that I'm like, I just want to read this same, I don't know, page. I think I actually have like a chunk at some point that I've saved. Then like, I want to go back and yeah, it was pretty intense. I actually listened to it because I started to read it and then I started getting worried that I wasn't going to finish it in time. So then I went to listening to it, and Lou Diamond Phillips was the one reading it. So nobody doesn't like him.
Exactly.
Made it a little bit better.
Yes.
But
I love how you guys know who that is, and all of us, like Jenna, Ashley, and I are like, yeah, like sounds good.
I guess he's pretty old at this point, isn't he?
I mean,
Wait, but actually though, like 10 seconds aside, who is this person?
So in
Is he
the mid 90s, early 90s, there was a cowboy movie called Young Guns that everybody fell in
I forgot he
love
was
with Lou Diamond Phillips at that point. He's been in other stuff. He's been in stuff recently too, but that was like my introduction.
Okay, well, I'll have to give him a Google. Anyways, sorry, back to what you were saying. Darian, thank you, Annabeth.
No, I was just saying that I actually listened to it because I got worried that I wasn't going to finish it. And then I was like, might as well freaking read it because I had to keep going back and getting the book and like taking my notes and like asking my questions and yeah, like referencing things. And I mean, at one point, I think I have like 3 pages that I have like clipped off that I'm just like, I have to understand this better. I feel like it's not getting the full attention it needs.
Same with me. And I will admit, I feel like this took me a long time to read. It was slow. I was like, oh my gosh, I've read 30 pages in an hour and 15 minutes. Like there's some stuff where it's like as a story, sure, you can breeze through it, but the actual material is pretty like dense where you're like, I need to sit on this for a second, or I need to reflect. Like, especially I want to say that it was the 4th insight where it was like basically the power of taking energy from other people. And I always try to think of myself as a pretty conscientious person. And like, I love to talk, but I try to be a good listener too. And that one really just made me reflect on my own life, where I was like, wait, we all do this. Even if I'm not trying to maliciously, like, how am I trying to like beat other people when we're having a conversation? Or how am I trying, like, in what ways am I doing that, where I'm trying to maybe like reflect that in an argument or something, that my point of view is right? And how am I doing that with people I love, especially like in romantic and platonic relationships? I had to sit with that for a second, because I would love to be like, I don't do that. And it's like, no, we all do that as human beings.
It's that self-recognition and taking ownership of who we really are. That's the beginning of an awakening, is who am I? What is my role here? And what am I going to own that I'm responsible for? It makes us, that's what this does. It almost holds a mirror up. Each insight, you have to look at yourself again. Sometimes that's pretty to look at, and sometimes not so pretty to look at oneself, but it's challenging, right?
Yeah. I know we're going to talk about this, but we're going to talk about the like intimidation, the control factors. And that was an interesting one too, because I mean, again, I know I'm not going to go too far into it because we're going to talk about it, but I just think that was another one where you kind of have to look in the mirror and it's not always pretty. You're like, ooh, yikes.
Right. And from what I know about all you ladies on the call, I'm like, I think every single person on this call is such a beautiful, wonderful person, but each one of us has one of these things. And that's, again, to Teresa's point, where it's like, you got to hold up a mirror and see, like, in what ways am I doing this? In what ways am I being aloof or poor me? Or exactly what you're talking about, Ashlyn. I think they called them, was it drama centers or something along those lines?
Control dramas.
Control dramas. And I was like, ooh. Like,
and the only way you evolve and transform, which is the intention of so much of this, is by holding up that mirror.
Totally.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in real quick and then we'll get back to everybody else on what they thought about the book. But it's you have to, this book to me was looking at yourself through the lens of the totality of the evolution of humanity. I don't know if that makes sense, but you have to look at yourself. And as you look at yourself, then you're in this big, beautiful process of helping humanity evolve at the same time.
And that's like a big responsibility when we become aware of that and understand that and taking ownership of it. That's where the living in the moment almost every day comes into, because of the responsibility of where we want to take our energy and what we want to create with it decades and decades and millennia from now. It's a responsibility.
Humanity cannot evolve until we evolve as individuals.
Well, that's why we say, like, change your freak, change the world. Like, change your vibe, change who you are, change your vibration, and that will contribute to the collective. So, like, a very core tenet of our Love Ignites Peace mentality.
All right, Annabeth or Ashley, jump in. What did you guys think of the book?
I personally had a hard time going through it because I was not a fan of it.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like pulling teeth for me to read it. I don't know if it was because, one, like, psychologically, I like to read either nonfiction or fiction, and it's kind of like intertwined. And so maybe I had a hard time like enjoying it because I was like, I'm not reading a story, I'm learning something. But at the same time, it was like, no, you're learning something, you're not reading a story. So I'm maybe psychologically, that's why I had a hard time reading through it. I guess there are a few things in there that were interesting to me, but nothing really was like profound where I was like, oh my God, I've never heard this before. This is new news to me. So I think it was just a combination of a few things. So I didn't dislike it completely, but I also wasn't like enjoying it heavily.
Interesting. Yeah. You love having the authentic opinions, whether you are in it, whether you like it, hate it, like, perfect. That is exactly what we're looking for. So thank you for your authentic response to it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it makes the podcast better when we have different opinions. But I did not know if this book was nonfiction or fiction when I started it. And that was so interesting when I came to the first piece of being like, because I thought it was nonfiction when I started reading. And then I was like, this is a fiction book. Like they're seeing colors, like they're either tripping on mushrooms or this is a fiction book. So that was a funny place to be, like not going into the book, actually not knowing the genre really.
What did you think, Annabeth?
So I also was a huge fan of it. I think there's a lot of good information and insights, quote unquote, that are throughout the book, but I was disappointed in the fictional piece of it because I felt like it was so message heavy that distracted from the story they were trying to tell and kind of weakened the story they were trying to tell in some ways, so that it got to the end, I was like, really? I don't know. I wanted more maybe action out of it than I got. And that kind of distracted me in some ways as I was listening, because it did feel just very instructive almost, that was more the purpose of it. And I did read that the author had been asked about this particularly, that, you know, kind of the fictional parts of it seem to kind of get lost, and he intended it to be a parable most of all. So that makes sense to me, that the fictional story that was running through it was meant to support the insights that the author was basically providing in the whole book. So
I have a question. Do you think it's more because you were listening to it versus reading it?
I don't know. You know, that's a good question. And I don't listen to a lot of books, so this was kind of new for me. And like I said earlier, I did it just based on time right now and other reading I had going on. And I don't know, maybe it was that it felt like there were long passages of instruction, and then there would be a little piece of action, and then I'd be like, okay, here we go. And then it would go right back into the teaching parts of it. So I do wonder if listening to it didn't have some influence over my perception of, you know, what was going on. So that's interesting.
Did you listen to the same one that I did?
Yes, I did. Yep.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, it was well read, very well read, and engaging in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, when he would do like some of the different voices, like the new one, I absolutely went to stitches laughing.
I admit I laughed several times.
Yeah, because you're just like, oh. Yeah. And then when he would, you know, with Marjorie, her voice did kind of crack me up.
Yes. Some of his more feminine voices were definitely interesting. Yeah, but it was well read, and I will say that having a good voice artist do the book makes a huge difference. You know, if it had been a bad voice artist, I think it would have been even more, you know, difficult to kind of engage.
Well, I'm glad I only had my voice in my head.
Yeah, that's good. That might be a good thing, I'm thinking.
You ladies really went on a whole nother journey. I feel like you took this book in an elevated sense, like a whole other layer we can't even relate to.
Yeah,
this time.
I'm like,
I'm a little envious of this.
Well, I got like the first part of it, I actually read it. And then when I started kind of getting worried about time, that's when I was like, oh, I need to get the Audible, because I started getting really worried. So I think that's why I was curious, because in reading it, I didn't have that feeling, but in listening to it, I absolutely had that little cheesy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I also think it's an interesting juxtaposition from us reading The Alchemist, because The Alchemist was a fiction story with the lessons, and it was such a good fictional story that it supported it so well. It was so rich. So I do see what you're saying here, where there's such big messages, but it was like kind of a story.
Yeah. No, I think The Alchemist is a great example of a really well told parable, a really well told story that included such a deep lesson within it. So it is interesting to look at the two of them next to each other. That's a good point.
do you feel that the author was trying too hard, almost beating over the head? You got to get this. You got to get
a little
this.
bit to me.
Yeah.
Yep.
I could see where somebody could take that out of it. Yeah, I get your point on that. Point well given.
What did you think about it, Teresa?
You know, I read it this time. The first time I read it, maybe I read it like some of you gals. It was just a different experience. This time reading it, I kind of stopped at each insight and almost practiced it or absorbed it. And then I would, keep reading and get to the next insight, and like the energy exchange, or it was almost like evaporating and blending with another energy. And I would practice that and then stop and then keep reading. So for me, maybe I read it this time more actually as a practice, I guess I would say. Yeah. Does that make sense?
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm totally with you on that, Teresa. That's how, I didn't read it exactly like you did, but
Yeah.
I took notes on each of the insights this time because there was so much information about each insight sprinkled throughout the whole chapter. It's not like there was one sentence that said, this is the first insight. Like
Right.
you had to piece together all these components of what the energy of each insight held.
And kind of bouncing off of that page, in the way that I read it, like, okay, I'm reading it and they're racing and they're doing this. And then they get to a practice, and to stop and absorb it, it was really layering a deeper understanding of energies. For me, that's what I took out of it. And I think sometimes just reading it, if we don't stop and practice each insight, maybe there's a layer that we're on the outside still looking in rather than on the inside breathing and living it.
Well, and the irony is they actually kind of allude to that in the book. He's like, well, I can tell you about it, but I need you to feel it. I need you to put yourself in the history. I need you to go look at the nature and see the energy. So
and that's what I'm saying. Like I did that. But if we're just reading it like, oh, I'm just going to read my book, again, you're just an outsider looking in almost. And I didn't want to be that this time.
There was like a finger experiment or something that he talked about, energy. Did anyone do the finger experiment to see if they could see the energy? Darian?
Yeah. What was that like?
Yeah.
I want to hear about that.
I think I was kind of laughing at myself going, I'm being absolutely silly, because at this point I knew, but I actually wrote all over the page, and I even wrote on there, I said, am I the only one that did this? And I was getting to that. I actually got a little cross-eyed because I was like trying too hard. So I was like, all right, I need to give up for a hot minute. So
it's kind of the same thing if you practice Tai Chi and you rub your hands and you work with the energy. Yeah. And then you can take that energy and cup it on your eyes or your heart. Or if any of you practice looking at auras, it's the same way. It's practicing manipulating and working with the energy. So that was kind of good to just have some fun with that.
Can somebody elaborate on what that was for those listening? Like, what was the finger activity?
God, I didn't even. What page is that on?
I
53, 54.
And if you notice it so early in the book, I think the real purpose is to really practice using some of these insights and being aware of it and understanding what does energy feel like? Because how can we get in and work with each other and have an exchange of energy if we don't at the very beginning practice? What is it? What is energy? How does it vibrate? That's why the beginning is important to practice that, I think.
Gives it that palpable, measurable aspect, which is what they were talking about, how it's like the scientific community wanted everything to be methodical. And that's why a lot of people can't connect with this, because certain aspects or like all of it in theory is not tangible. And it's like, so people kind of poo-poo it. So this gives some more tangible, measurable ways of feeling that energy.
It almost makes it the invisible visible. If you practice it. Yeah.
Which I find interesting that you say that, because at the very end of the book, They're trying to be invisible.
I know. It's almost like a complete circle.
Well, yeah, it is, because
It's the inside out, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Because everybody at the very beginning of the story kind of shows up at the very end.
Right. No, I was just gonna say I kind of got goosebumps right there. It was kind of cool. Just a little validation. Yeah.
I love that. I was just gonna say, Jenna, I love what you said about the science. I've been trying to find the quote here. I ended up I had the hard copy, and then I switched to the Kindle because I had so many things I wanted to highlight and save. I was like, this is going to be a nightmare for me to search. So I was like, okay, we're going to the Kindle version. But one of my favorite points was what you just said about the science, having to open your mind and see beyond what was traditionally studied through science. Because a lot of times that's the default of like, well, science. Well, this is science. There is science to this, but we have to look at it and approach it from a different way than we ever have before, to see this next layer and this next level of science and the energy and all those kinds of things. And thankfully, we are starting to see that measured. This book was written in the 90s, and we've had studies like the Dr. Okamoto study that we've talked about. It's Okamoto.
No.
Emoto. I always have the name. The doctor, before the podcast where we talked about him, I practiced his name for like 5 minutes. The Dr. Emoto studies with the water crystals and the impact, right, of the music and how it changes the structure. And, there's just so many things that we're starting to be able to measure now more. All sorts of things that we are getting there on the science. But anyways, I thought that point you made was really powerful. So,
well, and some of the growing with the plants, like that's why at first some of the stuff that even sounds crazy, like it's part of a fictional story, is real. Like there are studies about giving plants more attention. Like if you actually shake a fig, it will grow faster, like regardless of water and sunshine. So some of these like kooky things are actually true science.
Yeah.
There's I think it's called Damenher, but I'm not 100% sure, where they've actually set up recording equipment and they can hear, like the plants are actually singing to each other. They can hear the music of it, and they've recorded it. You've heard it, Teresa? Have you heard it, Annabeth?
Yeah, I've heard it, and I'm actually looking at purchasing a device for listening to plants and other things in the next couple weeks here.
Okay, now that's awesome.
Well, we're gonna have to hear more about that on the
So
next book club
it's
podcast.
basically just translating the electrical signals of the plant. I'm wondering if it'll work on rocks. I'm wondering if it'll work on, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to play with, but it's just taking the electrical signals and translating them into sounds that we as humans understand, which are musical in this case. So
okay,
could be kind of cool.
I'm interested in what you get out of that.
We'll
see what happens.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, the cool part of this is that everything is energy. It truly, everything is energy. The plants, the rocks, we as human beings, our feelings, how we're interacting with each other, how we're projecting our energy, as we talked about early on, onto somebody else, or they're projecting their energy into us. Like everything is energy. And so I think it's just the whole point of this book. I mean, there were many points, but one of the really big points was you've just got to pay attention to that energy.
And you're responsible
and
for
you're
your
responsible
energy.
for it. Yeah, right. Each and every one of us are responsible. We should probably move on to the set of questions here. We have quite a few. We've had such a good discussion thus far, but were there one or two insights that really resonated with you?
For me, it was the third, which is basically what we were just talking about, is the existence of energy and the awareness of that and how that plays a role in our lives. I think that to me was, like you said, Paige, kind of the biggest thing from the book was really understanding energy in a deeper way.
Yeah. And how we can transform that energy
Yep.
to transform humanity.
I really liked the quote, if one can connect and build up enough energy, then coincidental events begin to happen consistently. And this was on page 35. What I loved about that was the idea of, I call them God winks. So all these little things, all these little nuggets that occur in our lives that are little nods from the universe. And I do notice that when I bring out certain energy about certain things, I will notice more of these coincidences, or I will allow the flow of these synchronicities in my life more if I'm in a certain place. I remember being told when I was like 16 by a hypnotherapist that if you want a sign, you have to ask for it. And I think that that kind of goes in with this energy around the coincidences, putting out there the energy of like, hey, I need a message on this, or manifesting, hey, I'd really like to find a best friend, or whatever it is that you're looking for, and how that can kind of show up in your life.
Who else? What were your favorite? Did you have a favorite insight or one that really jumped off the page at you?
I really liked the sixth insight. I on was it page 230 where it says the sixth that we could clear our old repeated dramas and find our true selves was also permanently etched in my mind. And next what I wrote, like, rewrite the narrative. So like I know for me with like a lot of things that happened in the past, and also doing like subconscious transformation and stuff, like learning that just because something's always been a certain way and that's the narrative in your mind doesn't mean it has to still be that way. Like whether it's relationships with certain people or things with parents or whatever the case is, like you literally have the power to rewrite it and change it if you don't like it.
I thought that was a really powerful one too.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a favorite insight? Was that your favorite insight?
The one that I found that jumped out mostly for me was the fourth. I actually had the fourth and the sixth. Those were my two highlighted ones. The fourth, I think it just applied to situations in life right now for me, and relationships and the roles that people play.
Mm-hmm.
So I just found that to be the one that I was like, okay, this.
Well, therein comes your intimidator or conflict. That's what I'm hearing you say, where what you're really recognizing are the roles that the people have in the life around you, and you're becoming aware of it.
Yes.
That's going to shift a lot for you. That's a big part of life, really. Yeah.
Genuinely like the competing for energy. Like when you're having a conversation with somebody, and when they gave the example of people cutting you off or like talking louder to get their opinion and that energy, I was like, wow, yeah, I don't really like that. So it's kind of changed how I engage with those relationships. And so for me, just because it's very active right now in my life. So yeah.
That's cool. One of my favorites, and if you guys want to turn to, it was the ninth. It kind of explains it on page 241. And the ninth insight says that we as humans continue to increase our vibration, and an amazing thing begins to happen. Whole groups of people, once they reach a certain level, will suddenly become invisible to those who are still vibrating at a lower level. It will appear to the people on this lower level that the others just disappeared, but the group themselves will feel as though they are still right here, only they will feel lighter. And it's almost like we're really transcending. I thought that was just beautiful. For me, that's where the magic lied.
What about you, Jenna?
The two that stood out to me, we've already talked about them, so I don't want to be too repetitive, but finding the coincidences in everything, that's huge in my life. And Ashlyn, I couldn't agree more with what you said. That only happens when you're vibrating at a high energy. It truly does, because these coincidences, they're everywhere. They are present all the time in all of our lives. A perfect example is I'm picking up on so many of them that people are saying right now, where I'm like connecting this to something that happened earlier in my day. And it's a coincidence, but it's also like, in my opinion, it's not just by chance. It's these divine things that are working in the background, right? But they're only there if you tune in. And when you're at this low vibe, negative energy, that's when you're like, you just don't want to see that. So that's one. And it's reminding me to retune back in. And the other one, I kind of already talked about it earlier, but the energy, I think it really made myself look in the mirror, even at times where it's like, I'm not bringing, I I don't know how to describe it, like what that energy fight where it's like I try to be very conscientious of that in my relationships, but there are times where it's like, again, the example I used earlier, like an argument with a person you love where you're like, it really made me think about how I handle those situations. And on the flip side of that, how I'm a receiver of those situations, because I'm very, very aware of this in myself. But I am one of those people who like clings on to people's energy. And so many people tell you like, hold your energy tight. When you have a high vibe energy, don't let people's bad vibes get to you. But like, I always feel people's bad vibes like radiate. And I kind of get stuck on that, just in the same way that I think good vibes radiate even more. But it's like that kind of thing where like you're having a great day and then you interact with somebody who's just a negative Nancy, and that impacts me. And so one thing I'm reflecting on here is like, okay, how do I maybe take some of the other insights and get to where that energy, I'm not so much on the receiving end of negative energy, or I don't let it almost like radiate into me, if that makes sense. So that's something I really want to work on after reading this. And I've known I need to work on it. It's just kind of, it's hard.
Yeah. And I think there's that idea that, dark is actually attracted to light. So, the higher you're vibing, there are dark energies that they want part of your light.
So
or they don't want you to shine that light,
or they don't want you to shine
jealous
that
of
light.
it.
Right.
Totally.
It's kind of two.
Yeah, totally. Low vibe energy does not like high vibe. Like it wants to steal some of that lightness. It's totally true.
And isn't that kind of like the fourth insight where they're talking about competing for energy? And, those who want to overpower you, what they're after is they're after that energy.
That's a great point, Darian. That's totally.
Yeah. I think a really cool thing that it also talked about in the fourth insight was humans are disconnected from that source, and like, really spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, was such a part of this story. And what they're saying is when you're disconnected from source, then you feel like you have to compete because you aren't filled up yourself with all that energy of who you truly are. And that really, in my opinion, goes back to the Red Book that we just read last month. It's like the same kind of idea.
Well, and, to what you just said, I think, or into what Jenna said, when you're vibing at that high vibe, when you're like, imagine when you feel really good, how do you feel? It feels this high vibration, like in your body, in your mind, in your space. And I would say that that's when you feel most connected to what you're saying, to your divine self. And so igniting that divine spark within you, which is also connecting to that source energy, and it all totally ties together. But when you're feeling disconnected or low vibe, you're not feeling connected to source, and you might be an energy suck because you're not solid and grounded and whole in yourself. So you're trying to grab it anywhere else. You're trying to compete for it.
Or you're allowing people to take your energy too. That's the other thing. Did you have an insight that you liked, or did you just want to share that quote?
I actually meant to say the insight with that quote. So my apologies. I whispered to her a second ago. I was like, I'm really sorry. I don't know what happened there. I was looking for my insight so intently that, anyways, I went rogue, but my insight was the one that Jenna just said on the first insight with coincidence. So,
has everybody shared their favorite insight except me? I think so, right? So my favorite insights were a little bit different than what anybody else has said. I actually thought the second insight was very interesting, which is the evolution of human thought. And just how with every generation there is this evolution in human thought. How we thought in the Middle Ages about a whole bunch of things is nothing even close to how we've evolved with our thought processes now. And we're continuing to evolve in our thought, right? It's our thought that's evolving about how we're seeing the world and how we're interacting with each other. And then I also really like the seventh insight, the process of consciously evolving yourself, staying alert, being the observer of your thoughts, and then asking why. Of course, that resonated with me because That's what I talk about all the time. Yeah, and even dreams. I know Annabeth, you're a big dreamer, like literal dreamer. Um, and like what insights you get from those. It's just really paying attention to all those energies and consciously evolving yourself by paying attention.
Mhm.
All right, so we did have one question from a reader, and honestly, this kind of ties into what we were just talking about a second ago. This is a reader from Illinois. Your book club podcasts are so fun and insightful. I feel like I can't wait until you pick the next book. Well, thank you. This was an interesting pick to follow the Red Book because of the Celestine Prophecy. The author talks about moving beyond logic to an inner connection with God in order to fuel our evolution. I get confused by this because though religion has many good things, I feel like the institution of religion has caused more separation and division, even wars. How do you think God plays a part in humanity's evolution? That is a deep question.
That is
really
loaded.
deep question. That is loaded. All right. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Well, I don't want to take a stab at redefining it, but what it makes me think, coming off of the insight about conflict and intimidating, isn't that how we separate? If I can control something, I can keep you separate. So I kind of look at the religion, the God, the faith, whatever you want to, the doctrines of that is a way of how can we separate? Because if I can separate, I can control. So for me, that's kind of where her question strikes me, is that what she's asking? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. That's how I interpreted her question.
What other thoughts do you guys have on that?
And especially for me in the last, let's call it 5 years, I have really had to see like religion and spirituality as two separate things because I grew up considering myself religious. Now I see myself as spirituality totally from the Red Book. I take the things that I think, I don't know, call it what you want, but I feel like when you are connected to this source, what I'm going to refer to as God, this like divine spirituality, there is such a calm, beautiful, loving, high vibe energy that you can feel. And I don't necessarily think that's the same thing as religion. So I think when you're connected to that. And I think, to use Teresa's term, I think doctrine is perfect. I think there is, within that doctrine, there can be a lot of dogma. And I think that's what creates a lot of the conflict. But when you go back to just the pillar of spirituality and connecting to the source, that is actually peace, love, tranquility, thoughtful, like it's all good things. There isn't conflict in that pillar, in my viewpoint. I think it's the doctrine that creates the conflict, and that's where we need to separate the two. And I think you can be completely spiritual, and your spirituality can take a lot of things from a particular religion, because mine does. I would say my spirituality takes mostly from the Christian practice. However, it's like that disconnection where you're taking, again, those pillars of love, peace, to use the ones that are most relevant to this, community, connection. It's all these very like beautiful, incredible things. And I think when you're connected to that, and when you're in that, there's no conflict in that. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you both, in my opinion, you both nailed it in the sense of the more we unify with the all good things that we truly are, love and peace and abundance and happiness and joy and whatever that list is, then, having good energy is easier. Interacting with other people is easier because you're just so comfortable in this idea of authentically who you truly are.
And you understand,
and that has nothing to do with dogma. That is like your direct connection, your direct relationship is which was what you guys were talking
And to draw a parallel to what we were talking about at the beginning, when we were talking about what have we been doing to unite our divine spark, it's every single one of us is going to have something completely different that ignites that. But what's common is that frequency of love that we can connect across all of us. However, what ignites my divine spark, someone's going to be like, no. And what ignites somebody else's divine spark, I'm going to be like, that's not for me. I think that's the same thing with the spirituality and religion. We create conflict because we're looking at somebody else's and saying like, that doesn't work for me. But what we need to be looking at is the frequency, the high vibration that actually connects us all through those differences.
One size never fits all.
Never.
Ever.
Never.
Ever.
I feel like that was a mic drop moment, Jenna. I feel inspired, and I mean, that's a wrap.
I couldn't find any book club questions online for this. So I had to create our own questions once again. And some of these we have touched on, I think, a little bit, but we're going to get just a little bit more specific. So I'd like to know from you guys, what are some of your life's synchronicities? And have you viewed your life through the lens of synchronicity? Now, Teresa, I know this is a major yes for you. You are like queen of coincidence, queen of synchronicity. In the afterwards section, the author says that if synchronicities exist, then secular delusion falls apart. This is why synchronicity is so important. Then he says, when our perception of synchronicity is heightened and coincidences come knocking at our door, there is simply no ignoring them. I actually think that's really, really powerful. And that goes back to what we were talking about just a second ago. There is like a higher power that seems to be operating. I mean, how could we have all these coincidences if there wasn't? So what are some of the coincidences that have changed you guys' lives?
I don't know that I've had coincidences that necessarily, wow, it changed my life. I have continual synchronicities that validate my thought of manifesting what's happening. That's where the synchronicities come in for me. I maybe have already made a decision, or I'm thinking of creating something, or I'm feeling like this would be so cool. And then the synchronicities happen almost like a validation of you're right on. For me, that's how they work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Teresa thinks it, and the next thing you know, it's either in her bathroom drawer or knocking at her door or in her store at the Emporium.
One of my biggest ones, because it's so huge, I still, almost 18 years later, it is amazing. I had already decided, we were in the process of, I was moving from San Diego here to Colorado. And we were, my husband at the time, or my husband, and our best friends, we had just finished breakfast. We're walking in a Denny's, like a Denny's and a IHOP, kind of a whole quadrant thing. We're walking in the parking lot, and I'm moving to Castle Rock, okay? And there is a huge semi, with the two trailers and the big cab, and it was all white. Nothing else on this semi except black letters that said Castle Rock all the way down the side. I thought I was going crazy, right? I said, do you guys see, you do see the semi that says Castle Rock? And they just blew it off like, yeah, like, I don't think they understood it. But that's a huge thing. That's huge. So that's how synchronicities work for me, more of a validation.
I have kind of a twist on that, but tagging off of your San Diego connection, this was kind of an inner synchronicity. When I was in high school, I, as we already talked about, played very competitive soccer, traveled across the country, and I was in San Diego, and I just had this profound feeling. I was probably like 16 years old, and I'm like, I'm gonna live here one day. Like, it just hit me out of nowhere. Although, yes, I then made the choice to go to college there, which is where I met Jenna. It just was the synchronicity of this inner knowing. And it's a little bit different than what we're talking about. I'm having these external things because I've had a lot of those as well. But that synchronicity played a part in my ultimate decision to go there. I just had this pull and this calling and this feeling from the inside because of that moment that had happened. Also, I really hope that we can read this book. It's called When God Winks, and it is all about these divine synchronicities, and you will get chills chapter after chapter. I mean, talking about a mother who gave their child up for adoption, and the child comes back to find them. She comes to a mega church of thousands of people, and they end up sitting next to each other. Like all of these incredible divine synchronicities that just will rock your world. But anyways, does anybody have another one that they'd like to share?
In 2002, I got fired from my job. Like the whole process of it was a synchronicity. I was having breakfast with a customer, and I said, I honestly don't know how much longer I'm going to be with this company. And he said, well, I've never done business with XYZ. I've always done business with you, Paige. And to me, that was like such a big thing. Literally an hour later, I'm fired from that job. By, a couple weeks later, my husband and I had our own business set up doing exactly what the company that had fired me does. But then the biggest synchronicity in all of this was there were about 4 major players in this space. And so I got fired by one player who I immediately went into competition with. And then the big player, the gigantic player in this space, we hung up our shingle October 1st. And by October 15th, the phone was ringing off the hook because the big player had cooked the books and the bank had shut them down.
Wow.
And like all of this happened in this, this was a span of less than 60 days.
Wow.
Fired, start the business, the big competitor goes out, and then it's like all this business is just falling into our laps. That was unbelievable to me. I still sometimes can't get over it.
Did you acknowledge those synchronicities at the time?
No, I did not.
I was going to say, because I remember, I was like 6 years old when this was happening. But the only time I almost ever remember reading you cry in my whole life, not that you don't cry at movies and stuff, but I just mean like, when you see your parent in distress, like when you're like, there's something going on, was when you got fired. I remember you were like sitting in bed crying. And with the awareness of synchronicities, you might have been able to have a different experience at the time of what was happening, but you didn't have that awareness. And so, or the faith, or, all those different things that we,
for sure.
you didn't ask the whys, like, no, there's like, all the different things we talk about, but how, when you have the awareness of the synchronicities, it might have, eased some of that process for you.
Real quickly, does anyone want to talk about their control dramas? Did you figure out what you were?
Oh yeah. I'm probably all of them.
That was exactly where I was. I found, it really depends on whose energy you're around, and you will play one of those roles.
Mm-hmm.
One of those controlled dramas. My apologies.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good perspective. I didn't consider that. I didn't have to pick one.
What do you think? What's yours, Ashlyn, or which one did you feel was most prevalent in your life?
I kind of struggled with it because I was like, I don't know, they all sounded aggressive.
They do.
I would say, honestly, like probably intimidator. I think that my reaction is to get defensive, or to get not defensive, but to get like angry. And I have a lot of energy, and, if I want something, but obviously, like, I don't think that I play that out a ton. But I think back to my teenage self, and I had a hot minute where,
we had a hot minute.
I'm going to fully put it out there. I was being a full intimidator. I was being a real bee. And I think it just was, I don't know what it was. It would overcome me. I would get so aggressive, and it truly, when I think about it, it was wanting to be heard and seen. So I would get loud and aggressive, and, thankfully I have a great mom that can communicate, and it was a very impactful moment in my life. I've actually shared this story with other people before. We were driving in the bus one day, and she goes, Ashlyn, if you want to have a close relationship, you can't treat me like this. We can't play this dynamic. almost nothing more in the world that I want than a close relationship with the people in my family, especially, you know, my mom and my dad and my brother, but my mom and I were the ones that were kind of playing out this role. And so anyways, yeah, I mean, it's just good to learn, and then you can kind of overcome it and create a different pattern. But yeah, I don't think that it plays out a lot at this point in my life, but if I had to choose one, that would definitely fit. And it's interesting, one more thing to that. They say, like, you know, if you have a parent in the book, they were saying that his parents were interrogators, so he became aloof. Well, I had a parent that's also has the intimidator type personality, and that's not my mom. So my dad and I are very similar, very similar personalities. And so instead of creating a different pattern of like, oh, my dad's an intimidator, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, like the same way I just talked about myself being an intimidator, he's a great person, that I then became the same thing, which I think was not discussed as much. It's not that you necessarily play the opposite role. Sometimes you can adopt the same pattern and behavior that you learned and saw.
I actually have a question. Since reading that, and I know this is kind of, I don't want to say off script, but since reading that, has anybody almost immediately changed? How have they almost immediately changed their control dramas? Just based on reading that. I felt like as soon as I walked away from that, I was like, okay. Like, Brett's like, what do you want for dinner? Normally I'm like, food. We go through this every freaking night, right? And then I was like, okay, that's me being an interrogator or an intimidator. So, how about we get, do you have some ideas? Like, you know, then I kind of, I was like so weirded out by the whole thing. So I'm just curious. Did anybody almost instantly change when they read that?
No,
I saw Jenna.
I'm gonna own it.
I think I started seeing it immediately, like seeing it in different people around me in different interactions. Sorry, Jenna, go ahead.
No problem at all. I just think I happened to have a scenario that closely followed. And so I caught myself, because Ashlyn, I have to say, I'm glad you pointed out that all of them were aggressive, because my first response is, who, me? I'm none of these. Like, I'm a good person. One is like, okay, come on. We're all one of these. We're all a little bit of all of them. Like, let's break down the walls a little bit. And then I got into a stupid argument with my boyfriend. Like, I can't remember what it's about, honestly, like one of those stupid ones. And the way I argue is I am very stubborn. And so I become an interrogator. I'm stubbornly calm. Like, I'm not a yeller, but I am lawyerly. And I make my point until you get my point, especially with the people who I love. I do that. And then when I don't see the other person concede, I don't even want to call it aloof, but I'm just like, I'm leaving, and I'm kind of go do my own thing and get space. That, to me, I always thought, well, I'm just like being the bigger person, getting space. And I'm like, no, that's a very childish behavior. And my boyfriend will laugh if he listens to this, but I totally approach this argument in a different way. And I actually started asking him more questions, where I was like, I do not agree with your point of view. Obviously, I think I'm right. This is an argument. I started asking him more questions. I need to stop being an interrogator and nailing down my point of view, because I think you get it and you don't agree, and your point of view is just as valid as mine. So then I started asking more questions, and then I really came to a better understanding of his point of view. And it was kind of like, whoa. So I think the reason was not that I read the book and I was like, oh, I need to go change right away. That happened to happen right after I had set the book down for the night. And I was like, okay, let's put some of this to work. Let's, be.
Wouldn't that be a synchronicity?
Yeah, probably. That's probably exactly why that happened.
The mic drop.
Awareness is half the battle, right? It's like, honestly, I would say it's more than half the battle. Once you have the awareness, then you can actually change.
Another mic drop.
This book has created so much. I love it.
Was there more you had wanted to say, Annabeth?
No, I think just it, like you just said, it's awareness. And once you see something like that, you read something like that, you can't unsee it at that point. So I think whether you're consciously aware of it in the moment or not, that information is gone in and will impact you in some way. So,
and it's not always us 100% being self-aware, which we should. It's
right.
also being able to recognize the roles the other people are playing.
Right.
Who are they? Are they at the interrogator? Are they controlling? Are they? And really recognizing all of that in other people even allows us to become higher self-aware. We're seeing everything. That's how we change. That's how we raise the vibration of our planet, really.
This made me think of a quote that someone told me where they're like, the moment you think you know everything, you know nothing at all. And so that's where it tied me back to that book where I'm like, so many times I want to be like, I've got a lot figured out. Like I read a lot of self-help books, I feel, and then it's like, no, you always have more to work on. There's always more that you can be like, this is a fault. This is something I do wrong. This is a way I have low vibe energy in my life. And that's how we keep growing. That journey never stops. And once you think you're at this precipice of, I have unlocked the key, it's like, no, that you know nothing if you think you're at that point. And I kind of caught myself with that because I was like, oh, I'm feeling pretty good. And then it's, no, you always got more to work on. Always, always, always.
What I love is I feel like this book club is a really fun way to continue on that journey. We're having fun with it. We're having fun like, oh shit, sometimes I could be a real piece of work, but you know what, safe place to share here, and we'll get it all figured out together.
But that's, we all have to do that. We have to learn to be vulnerable. And again, this isn't a journey of right and wrong. We've learned these patterns because of XYZ, because who the people in our lives have been. And it's just an experience. And so the awareness is, okay, what am I experiencing? And what different experience do I want to create? Which is what all, like Darian talks about, creating a different experience with Brent over what to have for dinner, because she's aware, and Jenna with Martin, and different experience and how I'm going to handle this conflict. I mean, that's a really cool thing. And it's just an experience. It's not really about right or wrong, in my opinion.
I'm kind of sweating a little bit. I'm like, oh, I'm being a little vulnerable. This is my pride is like, whew.
All right, Ashley, you've been awfully quiet. Are you gonna jump on the vulnerability train?
Oh, sure, why not? It took me a while to figure out which one I was. When you mentioned like teenage years, I was like, oh, I know exactly. If I'm reverting back then it definitely would be intimidator as well. I've reached a point in the last couple of years where it's within arguments and stuff, I've learned to keep cool because I'm like, it's just a perception. Like they're reflecting on me, like don't get triggered. This isn't me. But then every once in a while, you get in those debates where you're like, oh, it's on. You triggered me. We're going at it. And I definitely would be the intimidator for sure. There was a situation that happened with my mom. It was a couple of years ago. And me and my mom butt heads. My dad and my brother were sitting by the fire, just enjoying the night. My mom and I start getting in a little debate. And immediately I go, oh, you want to know the truth? I'll tell you the truth. And my dad and my brother looked at each other like, oh, here we go. And then I just went at it. And yeah, so I definitely would say I'm a lot better and more calm and collected. But those triggering moments, I definitely would say the intimidator factor is probably more my bigger drama that I have.
And I don't think that you always have to be an intimidator, and it doesn't always have to be aggressive, right? I mean, because there are people who, man, they got away with words, and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, okay, but they go about it really nicely.
I felt like the way that they wrote about intimidator in the book was like physically and verbally abusive almost. And I was like, whoa, this feels intimidating. So I agree. You can be all the things. And I think to what you said, Ashley, know better, do better. Now you've learned, you've grown, and now you're trying to do better about it. Mm-hmm. So as
we all are. There are maybe a couple people in my life that I might be more directed toward the intimidator. But for the most part, my control drama is to be aloof. Like,
Which, when you're an intimidator, is really annoying.
yeah, I won't like that.
All you want is to fight back. You're like, come on. We played this before.
Yes, we have played this drama. So yeah, I just shut down.
And it's funny how they egg each other on. And that he made these parallels of like the intimidator and the interrogator and aloof, intimidator and
For me, yeah.
for
that
me.
was it.
Okay. How everything needs to balance. Referring back to energy, like the masculine and feminine, like when you're in a relationship or a dynamic, there's going to be a masculine and feminine that finds a balance in it. When somebody's loud, somebody has to be quiet. And in these roles, in these control roles, when someone's being intimidating, most of the time, someone's going to balance it on the other side with an extreme opposite of how do I diffuse and balance this energy. So it makes sense to me about this intimidator, aloof, all of these different names for these control dramas and how they balance each other out, kind of. Not in a good way necessarily, but how he compared them.
Your dad and I definitely played the intimidator, interrogator, aloof drama. And my aloofness would just drive him insane.
And I kind of
and his intimidating would drive me insane.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, we had a really healthy drama playing out.
But imagine if you had this awareness.
Well, the good news was that from that whole relationship, that was like the relationship that I learned more about myself than any other relationship I've ever had. It wasn't just that I was aloof. It was, okay, why can't I speak up? Why am I not speaking up? What is causing me to not say what I really want to say? And then that's when I went into all the subconscious work, which was hugely transformational for me to change my control drama.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
we should probably wrap this up.
We are gonna honestly, we have more questions, and I think we could have a longer discussion, but people probably would like us to wrap this up. All right, so how would you guys rate this book, 1 to 5, 5 being the best?
Should we go around? Annabeth, do you want to start?
A 3.
Teresa?
I would give it a 4.
Okay. Darian?
5 all the way.
Excellent. Jenna?
I'm going 4.5.
4.5.
Sorry, I know.
Okay.
I know we hate the half scores, but
I'm here for it.
It's all right. Yeah. Ashley?
I'm giving it a 2.
A 2. Okay. Ashlyn?
4.
4. And I am also going to give it a 4.
That brings our average to 3.79.
Wow.
Above that 3.5 mark, but not hitting the stars. But I think that, it's fun to have the dynamic of both. So,
Well, there's such deep messaging in here. And I really think that really read it for the deep messaging. Don't read it for the story necessarily. It would be nice if maybe Dan Brown and James Redfield could have combined into one person. And then that would have been like some super duper thriller with all this insight in it,
and I think what Teresa had said before, try to take it a little bit slow and like live it in each step.
Yeah.
Break it apart.
I think I would have gotten
I
more.
would say I didn't keep this in my portfolio, my library. I will keep this now, and I would recommend keeping it, coming back and touching in on some of the insights and digging a little deeper. I think this is something you could really spend a lot of time on self and with each insight. I really do. So I would recommend it that way.
I have something that I kind of want to ending these book clubs with like interesting lines. And so this was probably my favorite line. It says, remember to stop as often as necessary to reconnect your energy. Stay full, stay in a state of love.
Beautiful.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
I just thought it
Good
applied.
ending.
Yeah, we'll have to take that with us throughout this week. Thank you, Darian.
Beautiful. Mhm.
All right. Y'all have a good month, and we will reconnect.
Thank you.
It's free coming.
Adios.
See you all next
Bye,
time.
bye, guys. Thanks.